There's mourning in America. Today, more than 60,000 Americans have died from a deadly virus Donald Trump ignored. With the economy in shambles, more than 26 million Americans are out of work, the worst economy in decades. Trump bailed out Wall Street, but not Main Street. This afternoon, millions of Americans will apply for unemployment, and with their savings run out, many are giving up hope. Millions worry that a loved one won't survive COVID-19. There's mourning in America, and under the leadership of Donald Trump, our country is weaker and sicker and poorer. And now, Americans are asking, if we have another 4 years like this, will there even be an America?
Good morning and welcome to AM Joy. That ad from the campaign group The Lincoln Project irked Donald Trump so much this week when it launched on social media and then apparently ran on his personal state TV channel, Fox News, that it sent him into Twitter paroxysms at 1 o'clock in the morning, just rage tweeting at everyone he could think of who's part of that dastardly never-Trumper group. How dare they? Do they know who I am? And that's before it even has a chance to start its full TV run. And before we find out if Facebook is going to let it run. Because, you know, who knows? Zuckerberg and company always seem so eager to please the big guy. So why so mad, man? I guess what's just got to be eating away at Donald Trump are the truths in that ad. The things that he can't escape with Trumpian happy talk about the economy or the stock market. America is sicker and poorer under Donald Trump's watch. If you were to take the 1980 Ronald Reagan campaign test, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? Hardly anyone who's not a billionaire could honestly answer yes. As this Mother's Day weekend begins, there are almost 1.3 million confirmed coronavirus infections in the United States. 1.3 million. And the death toll from COVID-19 is approaching 80,000 Americans. That is roughly the capacity of MetLife Stadium, the home of the New York Giants. It's also comparable to the size of Joe Biden's hometown of Scranton, Pennsylvania. I'm sorry, that is just staggering. It is hard to wrap your head around that many Americans dead in just a couple of months, just poof, gone. And beyond the overwhelming mass death, the deaths in nursing homes and hospitals and the multiple family members and shipping workers and meat packers and bus drivers and even nurses and doctors getting sick and dying. The horror of people losing kids and parents and siblings. We're also experiencing another kind of loss. Massive, painful economic loss. The recent jobs report from April reveals that the U.S. has lost 20.5 million jobs in just the last month. The national unemployment rate has skyrocketed to 14.7%. That is the highest it's been since the Great Depression in the 1930s. Take a look at this chart showing the changes to monthly job totals for the last 12 years. The chart shows that up until April 1st, there were overwhelming increases in total jobs in the American workforce. That red line that you see at the end is the beginning of the pandemic in March, which showed a similar loss in jobs as the beginning of 2009, a few months after the apex of the Great Recession. Now look at it. The job losses in April were so devastating that we needed a graph with a new grid to even show it. All the gains that the Obama administration fought so hard for, gone. Just for perspective, my mother was born in 1929. She was 1 year old at the start of the Great Depression. If she was alive today, she would be 91. If you are 60 today, your parents went through the Great Depression. You just read about it in school. Donald Trump is 73. He was born in 1946. His parents went through the Depression. That is how long it's been since we've been in this kind of national economic catastrophe. Now imagine that catastrophe was happening under your watch. That stadium or that city was just wiped out. And then imagine that millions more outside the stadium or that city were negatively impacted too. You would probably lose a little sleep if you were president, right? Well, not if you're Donald Trump. Because it wasn't the staggering death toll or the rolling economic collapse of the United States under his leadership that kept Donald Trump up this week. No. It was that ad. That mean old never-Trumpers were just being mean to him again. Here are the tweets. I won't bother to read them to you. By now, I'm sure you can figure out what he said. And he continued his tirade at an airport later this week, because flying during a pandemic seems like a good idea.
I guess they don't like me, but let me just tell you, these are losers from day one. So they should not call it the Lincoln Project. It's not fair to Abraham Lincoln, a great president. They should call it the Losers Project.
Mean. Now, for what it's worth, the Lincoln Project boasted their highest day of fundraising after that ad launched online. But whinging, believe it or not, isn't the only way to respond to the rollicking crisis that this administration's sluggishness, denial, and just plain incompetence has inflicted on this country. Enter the hand of the king, the apprentice Roy Cohn, Attorney General Bill Barr, who used this moment of crisis to announce that the Justice Department will be dropping the criminal case against Trump's 24-day national security risk/advisor and Russian ambassador confidant, Michael Flynn, even though Flynn already pleaded guilty twice to lying to the FBI. Perfect. The Justice Department, of course, claims not to have briefed the White House beforehand, but Trump sure did seem pleased, though.
I'm very happy for General Flynn. He was a great warrior, and he still is a great warrior. Now, in my book, he's an even greater warrior.
Are you going to reach out to General Flynn?
I will, yeah. I think it's, at the appropriate time, I think he's a hero. It's a scam. It was a scam and a hoax.
Joining me now is Rick Wilson, a Republican media strategist and author of Running Against the Devil. Jelani Cobb, staff writer for The New Yorker and a political analyst for MSNBC. And Steve SCHMIDT, a former Republican strategist and a political analyst for MSNBC. Both Rick and Steve are advisors to the Lincoln Project. And Steve, I'm going to go to you first. I personally, every day, am staggered again by the death toll. I personally can't fathom it. It's hard for me to process the number of Americans dead all in one go in a couple of short months. And I find it shocking whenever I watch Donald Trump talk because he seems so blasé about it. Can you just talk for a moment about, what it means to have a president who seems so indifferent? I don't know what he feels inside, but who seems so indifferent to that staggering loss, but who flips out when somebody puts that loss into an ad?
Good morning, Joy. He is so overmatched for this moment of crisis. He's overmatched at an intellectual level, at a mental level, and a moral level. He has an utter incapacity for leadership, and we saw it this week. We saw it with the settings he visited. So the two great crises in the country before this, and I would argue that this is the third greatest crisis, or one of the three great crises in American history. The first was the Civil War, where 600,000 Americans died, and we saw Donald Trump sitting in the shadow of Abraham Lincoln inside that hallowed space between the engravings on the walls flanking the Lincoln Memorial of the second inaugural and the Gettysburg Address. And we saw a man who looked so small, so insignificant, next to the greatest president, the worst president in American history. And then we saw Donald Trump at the World War II memorial at the Memorial Wall, where there are 4,000 gold stars denoting 100 American combat deaths, totaling 400,000 for the Americans who lost their life to save the world from fascism. And in the background was the Lincoln Memorial. And we see a man just so small, so outmatched, so in over his head. And so it is that at the beginning of the third decade of the 21st century, in a time of peace and prosperity, generally speaking, the United States elected very narrowly to the presidency a reality television show star, a failed businessman, a con man, really a carnival barker. We had a real lack of imagination in this country for the capacity, for the possibility of real tragedy. And real tragedies come. And when we look at that ad, it was just days ago that it aired, and the ad talks about 60,000 dead Americans, and now we're nearly at 80,000, and soon we'll be at 100,000, and soon we'll be at 200,000. This is a man who promised to run saying, I can fix it alone. I will make America great again. And his legacy will be mass death, will be suffering at an epic level, and economic collapse. That's the Trump legacy, and he has demonstrated through this crisis he has exactly zero capacity to lead this nation out of this mess. And it will not be the work of one presidential term, it will be the work of many presidential terms for there to be a season of American recovery. And we see every day his incapacity to lead that. And in shortly less than 6 months, the American people are going to have to decide, in the most important election this country's had since 1864, whether the United States will go into a steep descent of decline, or we can possibly begin to recover from the Trumpian disaster that the country faces.
Yeah, I agree with every word of it. You know, Rick, it strikes me that sometimes you sit back and you think Donald Trump has the same job that Abraham Lincoln had, you know, that Eisenhower had, and that is shocking, right? I have tremendous critiques of these past presidents. I think a lot of them were incredibly flawed, particularly on matters of race. But the fact that those people all have the same job is crazy. But the president of Ukraine was a stand-up comedian, and he stood up to the pressure of the United States of America, the superpower left on earth, and said no to attempting to reintroduce corruption into his country. So a stand-up comedian has the same job as a president, and he's managed to stand up to it, to live up to the role. Donald Trump, meanwhile, can't even protect his own staff from COVID-19. Here's the list of people that we know of just in the White House that have it. Katie Miller, the vice presidential press secretary, Stephen Miller's wife, Donald Trump's personal valet, Ivanka Trump's personal assistant, and not one, not two, but 11 Secret Service members. He can't even protect his own team. Your thoughts, Rick?
Well, Joy, I think as the major factor here is Donald Trump, as my friend Steve just said, was a reality TV star who sold a brand of competence and leadership that never existed. It was only created in a teleprompter by a writer for a reality show. And we have seen, as you know, he is overwhelmed. He is unable to process this mentally. He is a weak man. He is a man driven by his ego and his venality, and not by a desire for the country. And the difference, Joy, between every other president, and you know what, we can love or hate, and we can agree or disagree on their policies, but every other president, whether it was Bill Clinton or Barack Obama or George Bush or Ronald Reagan or Gerald Ford or Richard Nixon or LBJ or JFK, they entered that Oval Office having taken an oath to serve this country. And there was always a sort of felicity and magic about becoming the president of the United States. And they honored the history of the office. They honored the solemn responsibility. And again, you don't always have to agree with every policy decision, but those men all at a fundamental level were there to serve the people of this country. And Donald Trump is in the White House to serve himself. That's why this ad hit him so hard, because it peeled away the illusion of Donald Trump. It peeled away the reality TV happy talk. It peeled away the propaganda network, you know, the constant stream of reinforcement. And it told the truth about what's happening in this country. Mourning in America, when Ronald Reagan ran it, it worked not because Ronald Reagan convinced America things were great, but because they believed it and it amplified that. This is taking what Americans know right now. We are in a crisis without a president who can manage to lead this country effectively, and they are scared. And they are angry, and they are determined to do something different. And Donald Trump's reaction is the kind of thing that the way a weak man reacts to a strong crisis.
Yeah. Jelani, you know, just to take a bit of a historic look here on this, this is a president whose policy has been no masks, no social distancing in his presence. At House meetings, here's an NBC News headline. 24 House Republicans gathered with Trump and other administration officials in the state dining room at the White House on Friday afternoon to discuss the country's economic recovery from the pandemic. None of the attendees wore a mask. Chief of Staff Mark Meadows defended the White House's decision not to require queer meeting attendees to wear face coverings, telling reporters that the protocols put in place put a stronger emphasis on making sure we do the mitigation that we need to do. This president met with 90-some-odd-year-old military hero veterans and didn't think that it was important to protect them, right? It was more important that he get the pay. It's all about pictures. I mean, Ronald Reagan was an actor. You know, not all our presidents come from the traditional line of what a president, but they all try to be president. This guy isn't even trying. He's just trying to get pictures of himself looking like the president. Your thoughts?
Well, I mean, I think he's trying to be what he thinks the president is. And I think he believes the presidency is no different than a kind of all-powerful throne that's bestowed upon a person, which is one of the reasons why I think he had so much contempt for Barack Obama. The idea of a black man having that kind of power was just inimical to his entire sense of himself as a person, particularly as a white person. But I also think explains why he has the kind of fealty and admiration he has for people like Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un. And so it wasn't really a matter of power, of service rather, but a matter of power. And so there's just two other quick things I want to say is that Rick may not remember this, but we did a panel together at the outset, like not long after the election. And we were kind of gaming out how this might turn out. And most of the things we thought about were in terms of policy and in terms of the guardrails of democracy being demolished one by one, and what the kind of bigger philosophical implications of this might be. But one of the things I think that we didn't focus on at the time was the sheer ineptitude, the sheer incompetence that had attended every other undertaking that had defined Donald Trump's life prior to the presidency, and what the implications of that could be in the case of a disaster. And finally, Steve made two good points. We talked about the Civil War and the Great Depression as these trials that have kind of become benchmarks for American leadership. And I think that's important, but we should also think about the people who prefaced those trials. And those are the best examples we can think of. So it's not Abraham Lincoln in the Civil War. It's James Buchanan ineptly fumbling us into the Civil War. It is not FDR in the Great Depression. It's Herbert Hoover removing thousands of U.S. veterans who were on the Mall in the Bonus March, asking for relief from their government, asking for help from their government, and him using troops to remove them out of there. So we have the precedent for this. Like, we've seen this, and it's exactly the kind of bumbling, inept leadership that precedes crises of this magnitude.
Yeah, absolutely. Just very quickly before we go, but none of them managed to have 20 million people in 1 month lose their jobs. Very quickly, Facebook responded to this idea that they're not going to run the ad that our other two guests are behind or are part of. If a third-party fact-checker, they said, finds a super PAC or other outside groups claim false or partly false, it can't run as an ad on Facebook. They said, I get you disagree with the fact-check, but I don't think you want us overruling independent fact-checkers. Imagine if the shoe's on the other foot. Just really quickly want to point out that among their fact checkers is the Daily Caller. The Daily Caller is one of the people who decides what is factual that can run on Facebook. This ad will run on this show, and we hope that others, I know that Mourning Joe is going to run it again. Thank you all for being here. I'm sorry that we're out of time. Rick Wilson, Steve Schmidt, thank you. Jelani's going to join us in our next hour. American Carnage, for real.